As a white man in the UK, I have a 1 in 17 chance of ending up in prison at some point in my life. For a black man, this chance is 1 in 3. Recent studies, most notably the Lammy Review, have consistently found that systemic racism is still present in the UK legal system. And this is not an unknown fact. 51% of BAME individuals believe that the Crown Prosecution Service unfairly discriminates against particular groups and individuals. Yet we still fail to do something about it. Justice is a fundamental pillar of our society. As individuals, we find comfort in the knowledge that the right people are convicted and that we're protected by this. But when one group of individuals are consistently failed by the criminal justice system, justice for the country as a whole is lost. And we should all feel the need for change. With us to discuss the causes behind this racial inequality, as well as actions both individuals and the government can take to address it, is Sade Kazo, Head of Policy at Equal, an independent policy think tank which specialises in racial injustice in the legal system. Sade, thank you so much for being with us. And to kick things off, is systemic racism really still present in the UK legal system? And if so, how does it work?
So, there's lots of different ways, but the most obvious one is that Black people are 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched than their white counterparts. So the legal system has many different layers, but the obvious way of getting into it is to then be picked up by a police officer, charged and effectively convicted. If you are more likely to be stopped and searched, then you are effectively being over-policed. And that's what you see going through the system. There are things, incidents we've seen before where police officers have interacted with young people and, things have turned into a challenge, and that person has, it's responded or whatever, and that person then faces a conviction or a charge for assaulting a police officer, for example. And that is effectively another way to get you into the system, because if you are stopped and searched without any reasonable grounds and you haven't got anything on you, then effectively there should be no further action. But actually what often happens is things escalate and that person ends up in the system in some way. You then go further down the line into things like sentencing. So we know that the Sentencing Council recently produced a piece of research where they investigated the association between ethnicity and the sentence imposed for drug offences. And they found that BAME offenders were more likely to receive an immediate custodial sentence for a drug offence than their white counterparts. That again shows you that there is something in that system that means that, those people from BAME backgrounds face a harsher sentence. And it's through those unconscious biases that we talked about earlier that you can see through the statistics that there are issues with people's thought process or perhaps challenging their own biases, which leads them to, sentence people more harshly or stop people more often.
But can this be entirely explained by subconscious biases, or are there also structural factors causing this racial disparity?
There are lots of different things that impact on that, including health, education, where you live, your employment, and so on. What you find, and there is a concept called tipping, and this was used some years ago when social housing became really quite popular, and lots of people from BAME backgrounds were put in the same areas. Now, if you put lots of people in the same area, then it's quite easy to say that area, therefore, has a high crime rate, and that's because of the people in that area. Actually, it's probably more linked to poverty. And the link between poverty and crime, or poverty in the justice system, is probably more prevalent than actually, there's a high crime rate in, Brent, for example, so it must be because there are more BAME people in that borough. There are more BAME people in that borough, but there's also more poverty in that borough, which is probably likely to have more of an impact than the fact that those people are BAME.
And so far, how effective has the government been in tackling this systemic racism?
The government recently published an update on their Lammy recommendations and what they've done since those Lammy recommendations. So if, for those who haven't read the Lammy review, just reviewed the criminal justice system in terms of racial disparity. And what you can see is that the Ministry of Justice has an appetite for change. That is clear. The Secretary of State is quite clear that he understands that this is a complex issue that requires a concerted effort. So yes, I think that they are trying to deal with it. I think there is an appetite to deal with it, but I think that there are a lot of initiatives, but not necessarily enough data to support that those initiatives work. So I think it's quite important that some of the work that's going on produces those results.
And looking to the future, are there any other significant steps or policies the government can introduce to reform the criminal justice system?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of areas where there could be a challenge, especially in the legal system. I think we need to just implement the Lammy recommendations. I mean, that's the starting point. Implement them all and really take them in and absorb what they mean and the reasons why those recommendations were made. I think there needs to be some public debate about stop and search. There's lots of evidence to show that it's actually not as productive as people think it is. Only 17% of stops actually result in an arrest, which, this is something I think the government and the people need to reflect on, whether this is a useful tool in its current capacity. There needs to be increased representation in police forces. There needs to be diversity, and that goes across the whole of the legal system, especially the judiciary. And we need to ensure that the police complaints facility actually looks at the specific area of discrimination and race to see if there is evidence to support a lot of what we've been saying and people have been saying during the Black Lives Matter movement.
And for people that are particularly passionate about getting behind this cause, how can they educate themselves further and then put that education into support for the movement?
So there's a few things that people can do on an individual level, but I think from a strategic level, there needs to be a sort of plan. And I guess what you see in these Black Lives Matter movements is that a lot of people are asking the question, what now? What do you do after the protest? And what can we implement for change? I think as a community, you need to know what your asks are. So what are the asks? Because from my point of view, some of the asks, as I mentioned before, might be reviewing stop and search and whether it's a useful tool, or it might be looking at how do you specifically increase representation in police forces. But we need to look at what the asks are, what we think the issues are. And again, organizations like Equal, and I'm sure other race equality organizations could provide you with loads of different things that we think should be addressed. But on an individual level, donate into causes so that they can continue to fight that, that systemic racism. Race equality organizations exist across the UK, but in terms of funding and money, they are voluntary sector organizations and can't survive without funding. And so it's really important that people do donate if they can't physically themselves do something about race equality. The other thing is volunteering with those organizations. So if you can't give money, give time. A lot of those organizations need people. They are working in really small teams, and actually having people volunteer directly would be really supportive. And I think the other thing on an individual level is to challenge things. So as you see them, as they happen, challenge them live in real time, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in employment, whether it's in the legal system. Because I think, it's really about having those conversations on a daily basis and making it more comfortable to talk about race and the inequality that comes with it. So yes, I think we need to do all of those things. But yes, petitions, I agree. Looking at consultations, things that are out there. Government often put out consultations and requests for evidence or information, and those are public consultations. And I think it's really important that people start to look for these things and actually respond to them. As I said, the Sentencing Council had a consultation about drug offences recently. You've got the Equality Act consultation that's ongoing at the moment. It's a public consultation, and these are the areas where people can voice their opinions and their views in a place where people really need to take them on and will take them on, because that's the whole point of a consultation. So I think we have to exhaust the things that are in place already. We have lots of systems and places where you can add your voice, but I don't necessarily think people look for them as much as they probably could, and they're not promoted as well as they should be.
And to finish, do you want to give us a brief description about your organisation, Equal, and how people can get behind it and support it?
So Equal is a national independent advisory group that was created to address the poor outcomes experienced by BAME groups, and specifically young Black men and Muslim people, in the criminal justice system. Equal is one part of my organisation, but the wider organisation focuses on things like employment or mentoring and role models. So there's a vast amount of stuff that we do in terms of engagement with young people, but from an Equal point of view, specifically about addressing the outcomes of BAME groups.
The ability of the legal system to convict the right people isn't something that only affects the victims and the defendants of any given court case. It's something that affects the rest of society just as much. Because if the wrong person is convicted, the real perpetrator is free to commit another crime. Perhaps a crime that affects you, a family member, a friend, or a loved one. So not only should we call for reform out of respect for the rights of one another, we should also be calling for it to protect our own rights and the safety of those around us. I really hope this has been informative, and for those that want to get more involved and educate themselves further, this is one of a 4-part series looking at systemic racism in the UK. So please do check out the rest of the series.